Welcome. This is the fourth edition of Sharpe Takes, and I'm excited to have Ken Fredette as my guest today. Ken was raised in Rutland Town and spent his teen years working with his uncles on their dairy farm in center Rutland. Later in life, he earned a living as a commercial diver, retiring in 2018. He and his wife Kate have lived in Wallingford for the past 37 years and raised their three children there. They live off-grid in a timber frame home and that they helped design and build 14 years ago. His community involvement includes 20 years as a school board member, including a term as president of the Vermont School Boards Association, and he was a charter member of the school board when the Mill River Unified Union School District, that's a mouthful, was formed in 2016. He also served 15 years as Wallingford's representative to the Rutland Regional Planning Commission and volunteered at Solar Fest for his first 20 years. Welcome, Ken.
Thank
it's
you,
great
Dave.
to have you. And you're here as a member of the Friends of Vermont Public Education. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that organization?
Sure. It's a grassroots organization that several past presidents, two past presidents and myself, past presidents of the VSBA, got together. They called me. We joked that they pulled us all out of retirement. I think some school board members never retire, but what happened was Neil Odell, who just left as president of the VSBA, wrote a letter to the editor about public schools. Greg Hughes, who was a longtime school board member over in the Bethel area, saw that and it inspired him to give a speech at a town meeting. Geo Honingford, who was president of the VSBA before Neil, saw that speech, and it all kind of then. Sure. Geo called me up and said, "What do you think about starting up an organization?" So we have 5 members of the steering committee, the 3 I just mentioned, and Adrienne Raymond, who was a long-time school board member at Mill River. I've known her for a long time in my neck of the woods. And Geo, Neil, Adrienne, and me. Oh, I'm the 5th one.
All right. So what's the purpose of this organization?
Well, as you are probably aware, public schools have been under attack for a long time, not only in Vermont, but nationwide. The mantra is they spend too much, which is kind of crazy. We can talk about that in a minute, but our group has seen public tax dollars being siphoned away from public schools for various reasons, and some of the reasons for that are not in line with our Vermont Constitution, with the Common Benefits Clause, that something should benefit everybody, not just a particular group. We're also flying in the face with the Carson versus Macon ruling from the Supreme Court. What was that, 2022 maybe?
The U.S. Supreme Court.
The U.S. Supreme Court, yes, thank you. That if we give money to any private schools, we have to include religious schools. That flies in the face of our compelled support clause of the Vermont Constitution. So our mission at Friends of Public Education, and by the way, you can find us at savevtpubliced.org.
Good.
Put in a little plug there.
Sure.
And we're looking for members. We have a mailing list. And our mission is to ensure that any schools, any education institution receiving public dollars, they abide by our Constitution. And as you probably know, education is the only public service mentioned in the Vermont Constitution. There's nothing about roads, there's nothing about water systems, there's nothing about fire departments or anything. Education is the only thing mentioned in our Constitution. That's how important it was. So we want to make sure everybody follows the rules of our Constitution, and following that, anybody receiving public dollars, any institution receiving public dollars, have to play by the same rules that our public schools have to play by.
And we're not doing that at this time, as far as I know. We're sending money to religious schools, and we're allowing at least some of the public dollars that go to private schools via vouchers. Those schools are discriminating in various ways.
Exactly, and particularly with the religious schools, there's something of a to-do going on with Mid-Vermont Christian School, still ongoing, and the head of that school, Vicky Fogg, I think her name was, signed, I can't think of the term of the law, but it's anti-discrimination law in Vermont. She said she went ahead and signed it, but typed a caveat afterwards saying we're still going to abide by our religious beliefs, which means they discriminate against various religions and various groups, LGBTQ, things like that. So they're in violation. We're in violation giving them money. So it's a conundrum with the Vermont Constitution and the U.S. Supreme Court decision about religious schools. But private schools also can sometimes pick and choose. This student doesn't fit our missions and things. And one thing that really sticks in my craw, and a lot of other people's too, is they don't have to show us their books, which I think is absurd. Anybody taking public tax dollars needs to show us how they're spending those dollars. And public schools do that every year, detailed, line by line. Audited and detailed every year, but private schools say, well, it's too complicated because we have money coming from too many different sources. I'm like, and public schools don't? I mean, what? So that is one of my pet peeves, is that,
So let's explore this a little bit more in detail. So we have several schools that take public tax dollars, private schools that take public tax dollars that are not discriminatory. They take all the students from a given community. And they do their best to educate those students, as do public schools for schools in their community. And the argument made by the Agency of Education in a recent proposal, or description, I should say, was that the number of dollars actually going to schools that discriminate is minuscule, 1% of the budget, and is sort of a red herring to talk about that sort of thing. And I suspect you don't agree with that, but
you suspect correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how $50 million or whatever, just to pick a number, can be a minuscule amount if you're talking about what you're going to save by not sending it to private schools. But talk about public schools wanting to raise that much more money. It's a huge burden. It depends upon what light you want to shine in. And this is narrative from the governor's office. The concept that public schools are out of control is just absurd. I served on school board, as you said, for 20 years, and I came on just after Act 60 was enacted, just after. So my learning curve was pretty steep. But I recall a young lady jumping up at a school board meeting after the Wallingford budget had failed, the only time it failed in my tenure. But we had a gymnasium full of people, and it was split right down the middle. You could see the people that wanted more money in the budget for their kids and people that thought we were out of control. And a young woman jumped up, and I had to call her out of order. But she said, what do you people think, that these people lie awake at night thinking of ways to raise taxes? They're taxpayers too. And she's right. We always kept our budgets. We look for providing the best educational opportunities for all children, and that's a very important all, at a price the taxpayers can afford. And when I hear the governor and other people, like Scott Beck was just recently quoted, speaking to shifting to an income-based funding service, that that's coming from the general fund, and there's only a certain tax capacity there, and the education fund wants to get into the general fund because they can't control their spending. They haven't controlled their spending, and I really strongly object to that. My experience, and I know I'm not the only one, we keep our budgets pretty lean, and it hurts when we have to cut programs to get approval from the voters. So the big problem is a lot of money from the ed fund is going to other places than public schools, and it just.
Yeah, I was going to say, contrary to the comment you just made, that in fact, what we've seen over the last decade or two is that money has been taken out of the ed fund for general fund purposes. Mental health issues. Schools are more and more responsible for the mental health of their children, for example.
An excellent example, because schools are where the buck stops. So something that the Agency of Human Services might have been responsible for in previous times are now at the schools. And the schools, that's the end. That's where we take care of all of our children. And we don't say no. We don't say no. We say yes, we'll take you in and we'll do the best we can for you. But when you talk about general fund transfers, when I was first on the school board, one of the very first things I did was go up to Montpelier under the Golden Dome and speak about then Governor Jim Douglas had convinced the legislature to hold back $12.5 million from the ed fund. Legally required transfer. There's a calculation, as you know, what needs to be transferred, and the law changes from years to years. But at that point in time, Governor Douglas said, we can hold back $12.5 million and it won't raise property taxes one dime. And I wrote a letter to the editor saying, well, the rest of that story is if the proper transfer was made, property taxes would go down. And he omitted that part. He says, it won't raise your property taxes. I said, well, tell the rest of the story, Governor. And then along comes Peter Shumlin. He got elected governor as I became president of the VSBA, pretty much at the same time. He held back, he proposed, and it was successful in holding back $24 million from the ed fund transfer, saying that his new health insurance program was going to, he said, he came to a VSBA meeting at my invitation, sat right next to me like you are now, and said, forget about the $24 million, it's gone, but you're going to get it back through this new whiz-bang insurance program. How fast, and that never happened. But the $24 million, Vermont property taxpayers had to dig into their pockets and come up with that. Now comes Phil Scott, who a few years back held back $50 million. Again, saying we're spending too much on teachers' health insurance and you can get a better deal. And this is what we think you should spend. So he convinced the legislature, as you're probably well aware, $50 million was held out back. And these are dollars that school board members, duly elected officials, worked on a budget that they thought was a good budget, presented it to the people approved it, and then Governor Shumlin and legislators said, he convinced legislators that to say, no, even though the voters approved this, we aren't giving it to you. And I was incensed. I wanted to sue, but I couldn't get much traction from anybody on that. But over the course of 2 years, Mill River, just for an example, lost tens of thousands of dollars both years. And it's like, but the voters approved it. Why are you holding this back? And then pointing to schools and saying you're out of control.
Your fault.
So again, $50 million, it depends which way it's going. That can be a big amount or that can be a pittance.
Yeah.
Money's going to our private schools and now religious schools are not a pittance. There's a lot of money going there, and Friends of Vermont Public Education and other groups say public dollars for public schools, and if you want public dollars, you have to play by the rules.
What if, let me put this proposal in front of you, what if we designed a system where private schools, under the auspices of the State Board of Education, so they would have oversight. And those private schools that agreed to accept all students from a community, and do their best to educate those students and provide special education for the needy students, and then so those schools would continue to get the vouchers from the communities that did not operate schools, and then the private schools that did not agree to accept all the students from their community, we would discontinue vouchers from those schools.
Yeah, I would strongly agree with that concept or support that concept.
Yeah. So you'd still have some significant amount of dollars going to private schools, properly overseen, which the School Boards Association questions how effective a job the State Board of Education is doing in overseeing these private schools. But if they were properly overseen and accepted all the students from a community, then it seems to me they're functioning as public schools, so ought to be eligible for public dollars. Yes. As opposed to the schools that are not serving all. They're discriminatory for religious or other reasons. Seems to be might be a path forward that we could pursue.
I think that would be a good path forward. I mean, one idea, one concept that was floated some years ago, it was the 4 historical academies become public schools, and they were vehemently opposed to that. But to your point of, there's a lot of activity nationwide with 3 states just either shot down uses of public tax dollars for private institutions or upheld that public dollars go to public schools. Kentucky was one that caught my eye. Andy Beshear is a very good supporter of public schools, the governor of Kentucky, and it's a red state, but they said, in no uncertain terms, no, you public dollars for public schools, and we aren't going to go down this road any further. Vermont is kind of a different beast in many ways, but private schools have a long history here, and they serve a good purpose. They educate kids, but I think back in, I think it was 91 or so, when we had too many kids and kids were out in the hallway learning, and one of my daughters was one of them because they just didn't have the capacity, so they separated out kids that had special needs, whether it be what we think of special education or gifted and talented, out in the hallway. And so private schools began to become more popular to take the overflow of students. Well, that's changed now. Our population, as everybody is aware of, has dropped from whatever it was.
Our student population.
Student population, yes, thank you. And it's dropped, and schools now have the capacity to take these students back, but we have all these private schools that have sprouted up, and I think maybe just narrowing that down. But I'm not suggesting we eliminate private schools, because there are communities in Vermont that don't operate their schools, and the kids need a place to go. So private schools have a place here, and they've long had a place here. We're just saying you should play by the rules that everybody else plays to. Now, of course, there are going to be exceptions. There was a proposal when I was coming up through the ranks at the VSBA, and I was chair of the resolutions committee. A proposal came from public dollars to public schools only, period. And that's just kind of a sledgehammer approach, I guess. I mean, it makes sense on the surface, but the executive director of the VSBA at the time, John Nelson, said, well, wait a minute, what about the Austin School for the Deaf?
Yeah.
And it no longer exists. But there are schools that provide specialized needs. So we really had to think about the language. It wasn't just all or nothing. It's like, if there's a school that serves a specific group, cohort of students, and they provide these services, then they must be included. Now, and to your point of these schools that don't discriminate, Long Trail School comes to mind. I know some staff members at Long Trail. I know some students at Long Trail, or former students, and they do a great job. And they said, as I recall, they said, we'll sign that document that we won't discriminate. And we're happy to do that because we don't discriminate. Well, good. Then, you know, and
So some sort of qualifying process for getting public dollars
right.
that includes non-discriminatory,
Following
playing
the-
by the same rules. so to
Following the
speak,
Constitution, you know,
Yeah.
common benefits for all covers the non-discrimination.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't cater to a specific group of people at the expense of,
Exclusion of others.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And
So let's pursue another, if I can change the subject a little bit.
okay,
There's a fairly widespread feeling that taxes are too high, education taxes are too high, that maybe we spend too much in schools, that we have schools with empty seats in them. One particular one that was brought up to me just a few days ago was that Rutland is a perfect example, that the Rutland City School has 500 empty spots for students, and you have these small high schools in the periphery of Rutland, Proctor and other towns, West Rutland was mentioned, that really don't have the capacity to deliver a full slate of opportunities for their high school students. And so, plus the added benefit, the Rutland School has a tech center built in to the curriculum and built into the school. Shouldn't we close, you know, several? I'm not, I don't know the specifics of the Rutland area, but several, 3, 4, 5 of the tiny high schools surrounding Rutland City, and have all of those students come to Rutland where they have greater opportunities for advanced education, for technical courses and so forth.
Yep.
And would we save money? I don't know whether we'd save money. Would we offer better education to our students? I think one of the concerns I've heard is not only that maybe we spend too much, we don't get, our quality has slipped from what it was a decade ago, pre-COVID. Now, how much of that has to do with COVID and how much of that has to do with schools having to deal with mental health issues is a bit of an unknown factor. We do know that these small high schools are not able to provide a full array of course offerings to their students. Does that make sense to go to a regionalization of high schools?
There are some strong arguments for what you're talking about. Now, when we, of course, you're going to get a lot of pushback from people, as we know.
Well, I think that's one of the problems, as Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman pointed out in a recent thing. If the answer was simple, it would have been done years ago. These are politically, whether it's bifurcating the private school system into those that function as public schools and those that don't, or whether it's regionalization of high schools, or whether it's closing really tiny elementary schools, it's political, you know, it's been referred to as the third rail of Vermont politics, and you don't touch it.
Well, there's a lot, that makes a lot of sense, and it is historic, and it is the third rail. Oftentimes the school is the center of a community, and when you close that school down, the center of the community is, people are kind of like, where are we going for our meetings and things like that. Now, we attempted to, I'll say the C word, consolidate. Many years before it actually happened at Mill River, I think it was in '07, we were trying to consolidate under is it 701 in Vermont statutes or something like that?
Yeah.
But we were clear, we weren't wanting to close schools. We were just wanting to consolidate the governance structure, where we had superintendents going to, 10 meetings minimum. You're either preparing for a meeting, at a meeting, or following up on a meeting, and that's not counting committees and all the other things, and it just takes away from
Efficiency.
Well, yes, from somebody who is an educational professional, putting their best efforts in for the students because it's so spread around. So our proposal was, we weren't talking about closing any schools, and actually we have what has been come to known as the Tinmouth Clause when we were trying to consolidate. We put protections in for our small schools that are pretty, I won't say bulletproof, but they're pretty ironclad, let's put it that way. So what we were wanting to do is the governance structure. So, and we were successful. The first attempt was not successful, and then later on, when Act 46 came to be, and we didn't actually go under Act 46, we were actually under Act 153 for a reason that escapes me right now.
Well, it was before, that was the consolidation of governance law that preceded Act 46.
Right, but Act 46 was in place, but there was something about our structure that didn't quite mesh in with Act 46. I can't recall exactly what that was, but we solved it. And what we did is we brought one school board governing all of the schools.
Yeah.
And just much more efficient. And what you were speaking to earlier is by doing that, you can share staff, you can share programs, everything's more efficient. And we told people right from the get-go, we aren't going to save a ton of money here. There will be some savings, like group purchasing, you know. And we were already well down the road to curriculum coordination and things like that. But as far as closing schools, I think you know, there's going to be a lot of opposition to that. There are some places where maybe it would happen. I don't see. I remember when you were talking to Peter Conlon when he was in this seat recently about one regional high school per county. I think that's a stretch because of transportation, if nothing else. But you bring up a good point about the technical centers. There is where opportunities are afforded to all the high schools in Rutland County can send students to Stafford. That works very well. But I don't have the answer to how to save some of these small schools, but we can certainly work for more efficiencies. But again, the concept that schools are spending too much is blatantly not true in my opinion.
Yeah.
You know, so. We have things going to tax increment financing districts. Right now, as we speak, they're working on the Killington Access Road, regrading it, paving it, water lines, sewer lines, electric lines, so somebody will come in and build a $6 million ski village, and this will set those. And I think TIFs are a great idea. I just don't think the Ed Fund is a place to get the revenue from.
Yeah.
The estimate for the Killington project is after 20 years, the property values, this is an early estimate, it may have changed, property values were going to go up by 87 million, and 26 million would go to the Ed Fund, and 61 million would go to paying off the bond over the course of 21 years. Yeah. So that's a good chunk of change. Now we have another TIF being proposed in Rutland that for a hotel when the Berwick burned years ago. And on Thanksgiving morning, I woke up and looked at the Rutland Herald and saw Belden Construction wants to have tax stabilization for this project.
Here, let's show this to the, so you can see this on your, go get your Rutland Herald and read the article yourself.
That's from Thanksgiving Day. I wish I had brought a banner for Friends of Public Education website.
So we're coming to the end of our half hour.
Sorry.
So I'd like to give you the opportunity for some final thoughts and wrap this up for us.
Okay. Well, I guess a drum I've been beating for a long, long time is if we take care of the kids, everything else will fall into place. There's a tribe somewhere in the Congo or the Amazon or someplace, I wish I could remember their names. When they greet each other, they say, "How are the children?" That's their benchmark, because if you aren't taking care of your kids, you got a problem in your society. So our children are our best bet for preserving our democracy, preserving our planet, which is, don't get me started on that because I know we're out of time. But if we take care of our kids, everything else will fall into place. I've always believed that, and I always will believe that. And I think Peter Conlon spoke very well to early education, childcare.
Yeah.
So kids are coming in school ready and might not need these special services. So I say support your public schools, and if you want to join in to have your voices heard, it's savevtpubliced.com. .org, I'm sorry, savevtpubliced.org. Get on our mailing list. We'll be contacting legislators. I'm sure this is going to be a very busy session. So.
Yes. So I thank you very much for coming today. I think the big problem facing us, and my motivation for doing this show, is that these are extremely difficult decisions, and they are coming to the forefront. And to solve them with simplistic answers is not helpful, and that we need to really consider what is best for our children. Is it best to close some schools for our children? Mm-hmm. I believe communities will survive. They'll do quite well if we take care of our children. And so that should be the forefront of our discussion, the benchmark of our discussion. The decisions are going to be difficult. We do have mental health problems. We do have a challenge in providing quality education for our children, and we do have a challenge paying for it. No question about those three issues in my mind. So thanks for your participation. I think it's going to take the input from a lot of Vermonters to get this right and do a good job. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for doing this and helping us spread the word.
All right. So we're done for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll have another show shortly. Thanks. Bye-bye.